Welcome to the HeroX Innovation Leadership Series. I'm Jamie Elliott with HeroX, and I'm joined today by Jeff Griffiths with the Canada West Foundation. Jeff has been doing some great innovation work, particularly around the future of learning and workforce development. Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jamie. It's great to be here.
To get started, could you tell us a bit about your journey into innovation and what led you to focus on workforce and organizational development, particularly in the context of competency-based approaches?
Yeah, I think it stems back from my first career, which was as an officer in the Canadian Air Force. The Canadian military was short of everything except things to do, including we never had enough people. We didn't have the luxury in the units that I was attached to of a lot of specialization. So we were forced through circumstances to make sure that everybody was cross-trained and double-hatted and making use of all of the competencies that they had, regardless of where and how they learned them. And this just became habitual. And then I left the military and worked in industry and found out that some of these things that we took for granted or had taken for granted in the military, it was a foreign language in industry. And that kind of led me down that pathway of competency and competency-based approaches to training and competency-based approaches to managing an organization. And so that was, in the late 90s. Here we are now it's 2025. So I've been doing this work as a consultant and now at a kind of a macro level for the Canada West Foundation for about, 30 odd years now.
Your work at Canada West focuses on trying to break the quote-unquote natural monopolies of post-secondaries.
Well, I wouldn't say it focuses on that, but that's a direction that it's gone in. I mean, at Canada West, we're a public policy think tank based in Western Canada. We're looking at any number of different ways of making this part of Canada and the world more prosperous. My particular specialty is on the workforce side, the human capital side. And we've collaborated with some other people and looking at ways that we can generate better skills for the economy faster and more economically than we're doing it now, because the systems that we have in place particularly in post-secondary education, aren't particularly agile. And so we've gone down that pathway, but I wouldn't say that it's not the entire focus of what we do.
Okay.
But recently we've published some experimental papers, kind of what ifs on how we could alter the system in order to create something that's more agile, that has more choice, and that supports continuous lifelong learning in ways that the current system here just does not do.
Right. And I've been privileged to see some of these papers. They're on their way out. And I'm curious, when you talk about the shift and the change, what do you see as the major forces reshaping regional labor markets?
In Canada, we have a huge productivity problem in Canada. Our GDP is lagging the rest of the kind of last place in the G7. We're kind of middle of the pack for the OECD. A lot of that is because we don't have an economy that's based from a skills basis, a competency-based approach to credentialing and to everything else. So we have a highly educated population in Canada. And yet, when you look at our productivity, like classical human capital economics would say that Canada should be top of the pack, right? Because we have probably more people, certainly at a higher percentage of our population has at least a bachelor's degree. And we have a much higher percentage of people with post-secondary education in Canada than many other countries. And yet our productivity numbers just don't add up. And so we have lots of academic qualifications, not a lot of applicable skills for the economy. And that's a big problem. So to attack, we have other problems on the productivity side in terms of investment capital and everything else, but we're not making full use of the human capital that we have. And part of that, we think, is because the way we generate human capital in terms of degrees and diplomas and whatever isn't very well aligned to a rapidly changing economy, and it needs to be more agile. So the papers that we're working on, some of the research that we're doing is to look at what are some of the alternatives? What could we do differently? How do you bridge that gap so that there are better pathways to work via schooling? And then, and what the talent supply chain is creating is actually aligned with where the economy is going. And then so how do we make the system more responsive, more agile? How do you improve the signaling up and down and change the way we think about it? I mean, Canada's not the only place but the employers use academic proxies, right? This degree or that degree or whatever as a proxy for a certain level of skill. And the mismatch is huge. And so what are they, I mean, the proof, I always say the proof is that, if all of the stuff that they do pre-hire was good and worked well, they wouldn't need to give people 3 months probation when they started, because the proxies would tell you if someone was a fit.
Sure.
And so how do you change that for the benefit of the individual, obviously, for the benefit of the economy and the employers, because they get a better idea of what they need, but also for the benefit of the post-secondary system, because if they're aligned with the economy, then they have a way to be more responsive, make sure their students are going to be successful and everything else. So I think there's a lot of pieces in this puzzle, and the thing for us is to make the whole system more agile and more efficient. I'm babbling on now, but
not at all. Not at all.
Going.
You mentioned doing things differently, and in the sense that the most basic definition of innovation is doing something differently than how it's been done, disrupting it. How do you see innovation playing into this? And this could be many different ways. I'm curious where that lands for you from the post-secondary perspective, from the individual perspective of learning to be a useful and productive contributor, and from the enterprise or workforce perspective once they're past the post-secondary.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll start with the at the beginning of the talent supply chain and the disconnect of what people learn versus what the economy needs. Innovation for me is being able for the schools would be able to the ability to shift and change what they're doing in terms of learning much quicker than they do now. Major curricula shifts in the post-secondary system at the credit side seem to take an extraordinarily long time. And even if we look at some of the more technical training, it lags the requirements of employers and the economy. So there needs to be better alignment there, better signaling. That means breaking some things, right? And changing things. There's a lot of innovation that happens on what I would call the non-credit side of post-secondary education in Canada. So the corporate training side or the continuous education side, much of which isn't tied or has a pathway to any kind of recognized academic qualification. That needs to change, right? Where the credit side and the non-credit side, there's no such thing, right? It's all learning is credited. So that would be a first step to force the issue of becoming far more responsive and far more adaptive on the learning side. From the point of view of employers, and this is a problem, and particularly in the part of Canada where I live, where the vast majority, probably 90% or more of employers are very small. Right? There are a few very large employers who have the wherewithal and the ability to influence what's happening in the schools. Most employers are not that big. They don't really have a voice at that table, and they're hard to get. They're busy there because they're small, and so the schools won't talk to them anyway. Because it's easier to talk to, the big corporation as opposed to, the little guy. And so they need to find a way to make their voices understood and to make what they're saying heard. So through collective action to influence what's happening in the school system, since most people are employed at small employers. And that's an issue. So there's innovation that can happen there in terms of how we do this. And we're adopting some borrowed techniques on that now out of the U.S. here in Western Canada around creating talent pipeline management systems and things like that, which will encourage smaller employers to get involved and then create those signals back and forth. And I think the other piece is from the point of view, again, of the learner, is greater choice and greater sovereignty over what they choose to take and how they choose to do it, and understanding what those learning pathways, what they lead to, which again is a feature of the talent pipeline management approach. And a little more, I guess, I don't less passive approach to learning
Okay.
from the student side, where
Sure.
people taking a lot more responsibility and recognizing that that this is a lifelong journey. You're never going to be out of school. If you thought you were going to get out of school when you finish university, forget it. It's not going to happen. And then building the systems that allows for continuous learning and continuous lifetime apprenticeship, basically, and tighter integration across all those, between all those players. I think that's the secret, whether or not, because of the way, then that requires changes in regulatory regimes and the way the post-secondaries are funded, which is the government's role in this. It means a change from some of the professional regulatory bodies to recognize skills that are acquired outside of school. And so there's a lot of places where this needs to move. And the purpose of the papers that we've created actually points to some of these differences and how we can break some of these, what we would call natural monopolies around credentialing and skills generation.
Deep stuff. You go deep into these topics. It seems like the credentialing piece, as long as that will continue, where it's a merit-based, achievement-based system, then shifting to a system where experiential learning gives you credit the entire time for the work that you're doing in a learning capacity. In the academic world, you get credit for work that taught you something. Then there would need to be some assessment set of tools that go along with all the time to say this kind of work is worth this many credits of learning.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, even the credit system, right? I mean, the Carnegie system of credit hours and things like that was that's an arbitrary set of measures that was designed to be able to compare programs of very different types, right? So many credit hours for a bachelor's degree, it doesn't really mean anything, right? And so one of the things I always talk about in terms of competency-based approaches is, how do we get rid of this notion of time as a measure of competency? If you establish good measures and good assessment, you can determine whether someone has acquired the necessary skills and knowledge, not based on how long they hung around, but on what it is that they can actually do and at what level of proficiency and complexity that they can work. It's a much more difficult way of training and assessing. It's a much more difficult nut to crack for the schools. But it's better for the learner, and it's ultimately better for the economy. Some of the work that's going on around the world in terms of open badging, in terms of open recognition. We talked about this before we were on air, but I'm heading to Paris to the EPIC 2025 conference tomorrow. And this is a group of people that have been noodling on this from around the world, on this notion of open recognition. How do you value recognition of skill or competency outside of traditional credentialing processes or qualification systems? And so there's a lot of work going on how we can value that. One of the problems that we have had in the past is that a lot of attempts to do this, open badging, early days of open badging and that, it just added noise to an already noisy landscape. And so, people went back to what they were doing before because they knew it was crap, but at least they knew it. Right. And but now with the technologies that exist, Open Badge 3.0 provides, a direct link blockchained back to the evidence of the competencies and how they were assessed and everything else. These will allow a lot greater degree of confidence in alternative forms of assessment. And then it's just a question of getting this stuff baked into HR systems, credentialing systems, and connecting all the dots across this. And then we have an ecosystem where alternative methodologies for doing this, alternative pathways have value in the economy and have there's currency to this notion of competency and context.
It's interesting. I come from a healthcare background originally,
Okay.
and what we saw arise in the US healthcare system was these alternative payment models, which were based on a value-based system, which were based on outcomes. It was measuring the outcome to assess the input. I think that's a very interesting approach. I'm curious. I know you're excited about your trip coming up, and there's an energy that comes with these things when you get to share these ideas with other people that are passionate about the same things as you. Where are you seeing great examples of the vision that you have for how things could be? Where are you seeing examples of countries or organizations or regions heading in the right direction already?
There are pockets of this happening all over the world. And that's the beauty of, like getting together with some of the other people and sharing around this. I was really impressed with some things that I saw coming out of Ireland.
Okay.
So there's a school there with a whole department who, in their own words, their job is to make sure students don't come to class, where they're actually embedding professors in the businesses to measure what people are learning while they're working. So it's sort of we talk a lot about work integrated learning and co-ops and placements and internships and things like that. This is more like, an apprenticeship approach to, and this is in engineering, right? Where they're learning on the job, they're learning from highly qualified and competent engineers. And then they come to school to fill in the little gaps that they can't get on the job. And so it's very individualized, and it requires the work of the professors in assessment, and they're doing this in the field. I think that's really cool, right? And that's an innovation that I'm seeing. Use of the U.S. Chamber Foundation's talent pipeline management approach, which is basically supply chain management for people.
Okay.
It's been operating in the U.S. since 2014-15. We finally got a program in Canada after like 8 years of banging on the walls trying to make it happen. It's going to happen here in Alberta, where I live, through the next year or so. But that's, again, running with employers so a demand pull system to get the employers to send the right signals into the system to pull the skills that they need. We don't do that in Canada, but we're going to start. So that's a neat innovation I'm really happy about. Some of the things that are going on on the technology side that allow different taxonomies to be built into an ontology using AI and some of the other tools. So there's work that's going on in Australia with a project called Skills Aware, where you can look at this set of qualifications or this credential or this job or whatever, and you can look at this one and to a degree of probability determine that this is actually the same as this. I don't care what you call it. Because you can look at all the metadata that's underneath it and see how you got to that skill. And then on the same token, you can say, well, this skill and this thing, which actually you're calling the same thing, actually aren't the same, because we can look at all the metadata and how you get to that point. So these kinds of things are really cool, and there are other examples going on in little pockets around the world. And what we've tried to do through those papers is say, well, what if we put it all together, right? And made a system that was actually responsive to the needs of an economy that is changing so rapidly. The speed of change is something that we have to figure out.
Right.
And so we're looking at different approaches. I think, honestly, if you look at some of the stuff on the technological side that gives us the ability to do this, we're looking at the data side as the linking piece on this, the kind of the signaling that has to happen in order for this kind of stuff to go on. So I've got a colleague down in the U.S., Nan Travers, recently retired from the State University of New York, and they're doing stuff on different credentialing approaches where you're credentialing as you go, formative assessment as a baked into learning, as opposed to summative assessment at the end. And it's very contextual, and it's much harder to do, but it's much more valuable to the learner. And those approaches are very, very difficult to do 10 years ago. But
Right.
now we have the computer technology that allows us to take that much data, that allows us to make connections with that data that weren't able to do in the past. It's not spreadsheets anymore. It's massive
Right.
data models. This is
What I
good.
see, sorry,
Yeah.
this is good. What I see is interesting because at HeroX, where we design and launch and run crowdsourcing activities,
Mm.
which are usually challenge competitions, we got to run a number of them with the Edmonton Police Foundation, for example.
Okay.
And there were everything from small scale preventing liquor store robberies and preventing catalytic converter thefts to mental health and wellness apps for first responders.
Mm.
And that one in particular, I find so interesting in the context of what you're talking about, because you have, I'll say it's easy to generalize. We want people to learn on the job. We want people to learn in a profession. But when
Mm.
you look at the professions and the other noise that might come with the profession, right? The
Mm-hmm.
stress and pressure that can come with being a first responder.
Yep.
And whereas a mental health and wellness app, which they sourced, and a lot of those, what was great is we have this worldwide community on HeroX, but those challenges out of Edmonton, the majority of the submissions and the winners were local. It was this hyper focused thing where really built a kind of a civic engagement platform there. But if you can see in anonymized data from things like a mental health and wellness app, these are the stressors that are affecting our first responders the most, then we can, from that big data perspective, we can help them. We can stand up programs that alleviate these types of things or be more proactive, which allow for more clarity on the job, which allow, I would assume, for more learning on the job, which is great.
Yeah, there's one of the beauty of the data is that things that we think we know, we find out that in fact we're wrong, right? Because the data
Yeah.
doesn't support what we're looking at, and so yeah, and you mentioned local, and that's a big piece of what we're talking about is this idea of local ecosystems around learning, around and community matters. So, as an example, some of the research that we did, Calgary is in global terms, a relatively small city. It's about 1,200,000, I think. When you analyze the number of learning opportunities that exist in an urban setting, yes, we have our formal school systems, right? And there are 8 post-secondary institutions of various flavors around, situated in Calgary. But then there's all of the other learning nodes that exist within this city. Some of it's through community organizations and charitable organizations and recreational opportunities and on-the-job learning and very informal approaches to learning, all of which adds to the person's competency. And it's all community-based. And so if you can build out, kind of community-based credentials around where and how this stuff works and connect it to the local employers, because most of our employers are relatively small. They don't recruit from offshore. They don't recruit from other parts, even other regions in the province. They hire locally. Yeah. So if you can create that ecosystem that connects all these dots together, I mean, in Calgary, they mapped out, one of the beauties of working with universities is they have an almost inexhaustible supply of eager grad students who will do this for you. But they had mapped out like 30-something thousand different learning organizations within the city. And that's like at all levels and every possible combination and permutation you can think of. That's massive. What if you can capture that, right? And then use that to generate value for individuals, for the economy, for everybody else. That's what we're talking about. And it's always local. It's hyper local. So
Right.
the fact
Well,
that
yeah.
your submissions on the Edmonton project, it was open to the world, but the ones that really connected with it were local, it's because
Yes.
they understand that local community. Edmonton is
Yes.
not Calgary. Edmonton's 3 hours up the road from me. It is a very different place than Calgary.
Yeah.
And the solution that works here probably won't work there because it's a
Possibly.
very different dynamic.
Possibly. Yeah. The winning submission for the catalytic converter theft challenge
Yeah,
was a mother and daughter from Edmonton who had had their catalytic converter stolen.
there you
It
go.
was fantastic. And I think the other aspect of that is how empowering it is. Yes, it feeds the community and it feeds the individual to have all those experiential learning opportunities, but they also feel more empowered knowing that they received that locally,
Mm.
that they
Yes.
that because the next time there's a hardship or the next time there's something to overcome, they know that they can likely find the answer or the support that they need locally.
Mhm.
And that's a very enabling and empowering aspect.
I think we're moving towards, if some of the ideas that we're kicking around come to fruition, we're moving towards a very much a community-based social learning and recognition model that values learning no matter where it happens, no matter how it happens, no matter, in the end, who cares? Uh, Can you do it? Do we
Yeah.
have evidence that you can do it? And do we trust the person who said you could? And again, when you do this at a local level, and now you have the people who are able to go to, through the standard post-secondary pathway. They are, I mean, we've opened up post-secondary education far beyond what it used to be, but they're still the privileged few relative
Uh-huh.
to the rest of the population. How do you then take advantage, for people who are outside of that tight circle and give them the opportunity? Because it doesn't mean because they didn't go to, they didn't go to the University of Calgary that
Sure.
they're not smart. How do we do that? How do we value all of that diverse learning and knowledge that exists in other communities? How do
Right.
we have a huge problem in Canada with underutilized immigrant talent. When people come to the country, economic migrants, we suck the best and the brightest out of the rest of the world, and then we don't recognize their skills when they get here, and they wind up doing survival jobs and they're operating far below their capacity. That's a drain on the economy. It's a bait and switch. It's criminal, and we need ways to recognize that talent
Yeah.
and get them to be operating at their full potential. We've got lots of people who have been left behind by the rigid structures that we have, and I think there's a huge opportunity to start valuing people for all that they can bring to the table if we can start breaking down some of these barriers and opening things up.
So
That's my vision, I guess. Hopefully I'll live long enough to see it.
I love it. I love it. And we could keep going here. I'm wondering, for those that are working in a similar capacity, they're doing some kind of work in this stream and they have an innovation mindset. Or they're just not happy with the status quo. What would your advice be to them to how to make things better? How to not necessarily disrupt, but improve at least?
I'm a fan of, you can probably tell I'm a big fan of community. When we started down this pathway of, competencies and competency-based approaches, it really felt like we were on an island. I say we because I have a few local colleagues, but we thought we were doing it and didn't know anybody else that was doing it. So and that's very lonely, right?
Yeah.
So one of the first things I would suggest to anybody who's toiling away at these kinds of things around the world is reach out and find that community, and it may be global, right? Soon you find out that they're islands, but those islands are all connected with ferries, and we can actually start sharing this information. Again, the technologies allow us to do this now in ways that even a few years ago we could not do. So find your tribe around the world if necessary. Look at other examples and adapt what's already working someplace else. And don't wait for permission. Just do it. The value of movement is people follow parades. And if you have the whole idea of tipping points, Malcolm Gladwell and his
Yeah.
more recent, Revenge of the Tipping Point, which is a really cool book as well. But the notion you don't need 100% buy-in, right? You need 25 to 30% of people who agree with you, and everything else moves. You tip. And so start and don't give up and keep pushing and learning, and you will build that tribe. And I'm convinced. I mean, this has been a long journey. In my case, I've been banging away at this for 25 years, but we're on the verge of actually seeing some of these things happen now, which is really exciting, because we've created enough of a cluster around this that we're at that I think we're at that tipping point where we're ready to see some real change. And it's surprising when it happens, because you don't see it coming, and then all of a sudden, boom, crap, here we are. So for if you're working on this someplace, like, find your tribe and start. Do what you can where you are with what you have, and learn, and then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again, and keep going. And you will find people who will support it. You will find people who agree with you and who can help, and just keep banging your head against the wall. Okay. It took me 8 years to get talent pipeline management into Canada. Okay. So it's possible. You can do this. And you don't have to have a big platform. All you've got to do is start making noise at a local level. It'll amplify. If it's the right thing, it will amplify, and it will find its space.
This has been a really great conversation. I have a feeling there might be more to come. Jeff, thank you so much. One last question. For folks that want to know more or want to get involved in the work you're doing and the work you're doing at Canada West Foundation, how can they learn more and get some more info?
I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me, is just look me up on LinkedIn, and I can and we can reach out that way. Canada West Foundation, cwf.ca, or my email address, which I'm sure you'll have in the show notes. And then we can link to some of the other stuff we're doing with the Learning City Collective here in Calgary, and some of the work that we're doing with this productivity project, which with external partners as well. And we'd be glad to hear from you. So
excellent. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Very in-depth and excellent, thought-provoking conversation. Jeff, thank you so much.
And thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.